Headingley, heartbreak, that's the banner headline. I don't feel that. I said off the top is for the series, for it to be the great Ashes series of a generation and beyond. If it had finished 3-0, we would rejoice, and it would have been a hell of an achievement. But Australia hasn't played that well. Not to win it in 3. They certainly didn't play well enough at Headingley to have claims to winning that test match. So it felt about right when England won. And the margins have been so narrow as to be almost imperceptible across these 3 test matches so far. The lament, I think, is when you have a dangerous opponent pinned, you better land that knockout punch. And that's what Australia couldn't do. The back-to-back wickets after tea last night, Stokes and Bairstow, that truly opened the possibility up, with England still needing 80 to win. But Australia wasn't quite good enough to do it. They were repelled by a young Tyro and a couple of all-rounders who had their best moments in it. It's 2-1. We all get to take a bit of a breath. That's true for the observers. That's true for the participants, because these have been frantic test matches back-to-back in an environment that's been growing and growing to almost, well, I think we can remove almost, to ridiculous levels. Some of what happened last week, which culminated in the absurd story of Alex Carey doing a runner from the barber. I've known our nations to be at each other's throat, but there's been an absurdity, almost a glorious absurdity to all of this. But on the field, Australia is a test up. England will feel like they have momentum. Headingley, that's where England prevailed. It's now 2-1 as we all take a deep breath. The wisdom and experience of Robert Craddock has been so crucial across these weeks. Hello to you, Crash.
Yes, g'day, Gerard. It's well summed up, mate. It was, we may be watching the series of our lifetime, really. And it's just barely half over. And you can tell the emotional toll it's taking, can't you? Because a lot of the stars of this test, Gerard, Mark Wood, Chris Wokes, Mitchell Starc, all had one thing in common. They didn't play the previous test, and I think freshness is going to be a key weapon in the last couple of tests of the series.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. Fresh minds and fresh bodies. They will be, they're gagging for the break here till Wednesday week in the next test.
Oh, yeah. You can just feel it, can't you? Like Johnny Bairstow, to me, what's he missed about 8 or 9 chances? He's not improving as a keeper in this series. And they're so loyal, their Bazball. That's their creed. They pick guys and stick with them. But he looks to me like a guy that just needs a hot beach and a cold beer, yes, and a rest. But it's not going to happen. They'll go the journey with him despite the clatter for Ben Foakes to replace him.
What did you think last night, Crash? Did Australia miss the chance when they took those wickets back-to-back after lunch?
They did, but, you know, you've got to give credit. When Wokes came out and he swung airily at his first ball, I thought, you're just not up for the fight, young man, are you? But he was, and he displayed a flair and a grit, and somehow he escaped against a welter of short balls. I thought they could have given him more short balls, to be honest. But, you know, you can look at it 2 ways. England made a series of partnerships like 30 here, 40 there, and Australia never let them get away, but nor could they land the killer blow. And I think that Mitchell Starc was very good, wasn't he? Pat Cummins tried hard, but his figures just didn't shape up. And Scott Boland, I feel, may not play for the rest of the series now. He's played 2 tests, and the only batsman he got out was Zach Crawley, twice caught behind, and they're clever, aren't they? They're batting out of their crease to Boland. They're countering that metronomic length that he bowls, and so they've sort of countered him. The way I see it is he won't play the next test.
Yes, he didn't bowl with any threat last night. And so I think back to the World Test Championship when we saw him with the Duke's ball for the first time, and the way he worked over Kohli. It's been a totally different... He hasn't been the bowler I imagined he was going to be in English conditions.
No, and I was fascinated by a CricViz study which said since he's come into Test cricket, comparing his line and length to everyone over the last 20 years, no one has bowled more accurately of seamers around the world, and no one has swung the ball less. Now, let's just think about that for a minute. So in other words, if you're facing him, you think, well, he's going to land the ball in this area. And if we can get to that area, we will counter him. That's what England are doing. They're batting forward and moving forward to him. And I think the leakage of runs gets to him a bit because he's used to being so economical. So he's been a wonderful story, Scott Boland. And I reckon, he will re-emerge. But, it was apparent how much they missed Cameron Green's bowling. Mitchell Marsh did a lovely job, and we'll talk about the return of him in a minute, I'm sure, but that the extra bounce and hustle of Cameron Green at his best was missed.
So in the checklist of what happened, so Todd Murphy bowled 2 of the 50 overs that were sent down in the 4th innings. So this is where we really learnt what the toll of Nathan Lyon's injury is. So I was trying to think, how many might Lyon have bowled? And incidentally, I think they were right not to bowl Murphy the way that it was unfolding. But it gave you that little insight is Cummins clearly had it in his mind that at various stages to bring him on and concede 14 from an over was both a risk and might have been the shaper of the chase.
Yeah, and look, 9 overs for the match. It's just, to me, his position is under threat for Old Trafford. It's not the Australian way to go into a test without a spin bowler, but I think you could ask Travis Head to do the job in the way that England got Joe Root to do the job. It's a bit of an ugly team, Gerard, isn't it? But I think that they played him well. Not only did Ben Stokes get after Todd Murphy, but when they had a left-hander and a right-hander in, they rotated the strike, and that's really hard for a young spinner because he's got to adjust his field all the time. He gave Harry Brook a bit of width, and he crunched him past point a couple of times for 4, so he never really settled in the game. I do love his temperament, and I think he's better than he showed here, and he batted well too in both innings, that's a sign he's got his head right, but you can't get away from it. Pat Cummins said the lack of bowling of Murphy in this game was just condition sensitive. It wasn't really a turning deck. But we all know Nathan Lyon would have bowled 3 times as many overs, or at least twice for sure.
Yeah, and when you think through Australia's team composition, now a lot of it will depend on what sort of track is at Old Trafford. So this was a better pitch than the previous 2 for the contest, wasn't it?
Oh, beautiful pitch, Gerard. And I think, they got it wrong the first 2 tests when they produced those super flat decks. Trust your bowlers and trust your batsmen. I mean, Australia's now gone 3 innings in a row without making 300. So, that's significant. That places concern over their top order and blokes who are high in the saddle early in the series aren't now. So Old Trafford traditionally is a good deck to bat on. So, and that's why I think they'll probably lean towards keeping David Warner in that team. I just feel, Gerard, that his position is really under scrutiny. There's you can't get away from it. And he's never been more closer to being dropped. But his scores of 66, 25, 9, 36, 43 and 1 before twin failures to Stuart Broad, he's giving them something, and he is good at first slip. So, have you got him holding on? I've got him just.
Well, I find it really difficult, Crash, because he wouldn't be in my side at the moment. Yep. So I've just got that starting point. This is eyes wide open, right? So Broad got him in the first innings of the test match for 9.
Yep.
The first test. And then the problem with the 4 and the 1 here was that he was out in the first over and he was out in the third over. Now, I think Australia's biggest problem at the moment is not getting runs out of Labuschagne at 3.
Yep.
And then how heavily is that linked to the fact he's in too early because Broad's getting Warner? Now, my issue is 4 years ago, once Broad started to get Warner, it was unstoppable. So the unknowable is that going to happen again at Old Trafford? Because 4 and 1 in this singular test match is not enough to get dropped. He just came off 66 and 25 at Lords. So if you truly believe in what you're doing, you can't drop him for Old Trafford. But is the Australian cause better served with him out? Well, it was coming into the series. So I find that very hard to answer, dropping him from one test match to the next when he wouldn't have been there for me at the start.
Yep. Oh, look, well, here's the other case, right? Australia 2-1 up in the series. England have to win the next 2 tests. And who's your replacement? Who's your new opening batsman? And I know people are saying, move Travis Head up the order. But Travis Head is beautifully positioned where he is to see some tiring bowlers.
That's the one thing I would not do. I would not move Head to open in this series because he's killing it at 5.
Yep. So if you're bringing in Marcus Harris, test batting average 27 after 13 tests, to replace Warner after Warner 2 tests ago has scored 66 and 25, and I get it's tight, but if you're dropping Warner, I've got someone else opening, like Cameron Green. Strangely enough, I reckon he's got a great technique and could be an opening batsman in a tall opening batsman way, like Barry Richards was and Chris Gale. But I don't think they want him there. But you could do it, I reckon. But so you're bringing in Harris? Would you prefer?
So I don't think in the flow of the series, I find it I would have Harris in his 4th test match of the series at Old Trafford, right? And that's totally different between parachuting him in now to try to solve a problem that you are eyes wide open on. So I don't think I am. I think I'm going, if you chose this strategy, it's sort of death or glory. If the strategy was wrong and you lose the Ashes on the back of it, then you'll swing for it. But if you truly believed in what you're doing, I don't think one test match is enough to pull the trigger on.
No, and the other thing is too, the Old Trafford deck, and look, we're a long way from it. I bet it's not like this one. I bet it hasn't got the bounce of this deck, which found Warner out twice. Now, it's a good batting deck. I think it's a Warner sort of batting deck, Old Trafford. And strangely enough, and this will sound a ridiculous statement in some ways, but Warner is haunted by Broad statistically, and he gets him out. But I also think he knows he's so close to the end that it doesn't completely undermine everything he does. Like he's made 3 reasonable scores in this series. He's resisted Broad at times, and Broad got him on a bouncing deck. And he's equally likely to get him again. If Broad plays, there's talk he might even be rested. I don't see how they can. I think they've got to go with him. But I don't think it's Shane Warne, Darryl Cullinan-esque where it's just you just sense that there's going to be something happen. But it is a desperately tight call, Gerard. I can't say to you that I've got enormous conviction that defending Warner is the right way to go. I've just got a gut feeling it may go his way. And if he has one more failure and they lose this test, man, oh man, then it is really open. It's everything's on the line, isn't it, for the last test at the Oval?
Australia won a test match where it didn't get enough out of Labuschagne and Smith, and then it lost a test match where it didn't get enough out of Labuschagne and Smith. That's like, there's a simple equation to this, isn't there? You're 3 and 4 have to be scoring your runs to make sure that you're beyond 300s, and we've seen that sort of reveal itself in a couple of these innings.
Labuschagne's the one that interests me because he's normally such a good converter of solid starts, and he's getting to 20 and 30 and then just getting out. And I felt his dismissal in the first innings when he swatted a ball to the deep, the ball after being dropped, that says to me that, his head's just not really where it needs to be. And that's such a rare thing for Marsh, I guess the challenge for guys like Marnus Labuschagne and Steve Smith is because they think cricket 24/7. I think long series, really are testing for them, because the great champions of our craft, Gerard, that there's only one thing that I can identify that nearly all of them had in common, and that is they get away from the sport between times. Glenn McGrath would go shooting, Steve Waugh would take photos, amateur photographer, Mark Waugh would go to the racetrack, Ricky Ponting would play golf, some players would go sightseeing, but they had escape mechanisms to get away and freshen up. And Marnus and Steve are so, tied into the game and fretting everything. So that's a challenge for him. And the interesting thing with Marnus Labuschagne's record is he averages in the mid-60s in Australia, but I think it's in the mid-20s overseas, and that's something he has to address, without doubt. The gap is too wide for his peace of mind. It used to be the same for Khawaja. Khawaja's closed the gap.
Yeah, you don't have claims to greatness if the gap is so wide.
No, very, very good point. And there's no apparent reason for it because he can play in all conditions, front foot, back foot, he's got the cut, he's got the drives. There's no real reason why it should be that wide, but it is. And it's something that Khawaja had to think deeply about in his game because he used to be a 50 in Australia man, 20 overseas, and now he has conquered. And to give him a little rap, he's been very good this series, Khawaja, I must say.
The wisdom and tremendous self-awareness Mitch Marsh always has done, and sometimes with gallows humour as well. He was player of the match for Australia in a T20 World Cup final. That is one of my favourite ever moments as a cricket fan, to see a player who has dedicated himself towards striving for a dream, of which most said he wasn't good enough to achieve. To see him prevail in those circumstances, Robert Craddock, I found so moving and totally fulfilling.
And good on you, Gerard. You've really supported the Marshes. And it hasn't been easy because there's been this amazing contradiction, hasn't it, between the two most unassuming cricketers in Australia who were vilified beyond belief on social media and to the point where, Mitch, I remember the old story, took up surfing to get away with it and then swum out beyond the waves right to the last break thinking, oh, well, here's some solitude. And the guy on the board next to him, mate, any danger you can score some runs?
Yes.
But that was life as Mitchell Marsh. He's the polar opposite to Sean, who's an introvert. Mitch is, of course, the extrovert. But what an innings. Look, if you said the most underrated thing that's happened to him in recent years, when he broke his ankle a few years ago, he had an operation. It was always sore after it. He had a second operation last year, and just suddenly there was no pain and he felt good. And he's back bowling good overs now and his whole self-esteem has risen. He's a lot more mature, hardened cricketer than the man who last toured England a few years ago. He's blossoming. And for mine, Gerard, has to stay in the team. You can't waste this form. And you can't waste his state of mind either. He's up for every contest. The century in the first innings, the useful 20-odd in the second innings, the wickets, the outswing, it's all there. So the question to me is how they pick the team around him, not whether Mitchell Marsh is in. And I feel Pat Cummins gave that hint at his press conference where he said, look, we haven't made any decisions, but obviously it's a fairly strong case. And I think in Cummins' mind, that Mitchell Marsh stays in the team. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, he's the straight replacement for Cam Green. So you've got to give me a team that has both Marsh and Green in it, which I think you can do. But I like the idea of you can't waste this sort of form. I think that's the way to approach it, is especially during a series. And nobody else got hold of Mark Wood the way Mitch Marsh did, and Wood's going to be a big factor from here with that pace that he brings. So let me just bring Peter from Capel Sound in here. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. We've got heaps of calls who want to participate here. Crash on the EFS open line, delivering simple freight solutions. Peter, welcome.
Good morning, Gerard and Robert. How are you going now?
Good, Peter.
Just a quick one about the selection conundrum. I do think it does revolve around the David Warner issue. I think Mitchell Marsh, as a right-hander, and making those runs could go up to opening. I'm not a big fan of replacing Warner with Marcus Harris. I think the danger there was they should have picked Cameron Bancroft in the first place as a right-hander. I like the idea of having a right-left-hander to break up that line of broads from around the wicket. But I think Marsh could come in as opener, and then you can settle Green back into the middle order and even go, even if Bancroft as a good slipper could replace Warner as well. You know, that's the big thing. You don't want to waste Warner's fielding, but I think you need that right-hander at the top of the order, and I think Marsh would be tailor-made for that. I don't think we can go with Warner again. That's my opinion. I think he's just outlived his usefulness now and putting too much pressure on Labuschagne and Smith Edge is safe. And don't underestimate Smith Edge. He made 100 3 innings ago as well. So I wouldn't say he's out of form. He's just been underperforming that little bit.
Peter, thank you. So, Crash, can you see a team that has both Marsh and Green in it?
Yeah, I can. I don't think, I believe Green's more likely to miss out than Marsh.
Okay.
Because I just think, he's coming back from a hamstring injury. I know he's bowling at training, but, you'd be very surprised if Marsh misses out. You could drop Todd Murphy, and that could happen at Old Trafford. That would have to be under some consideration, given that you've got Travis Head playing a similar role. And if you had all these all-rounders, if you had Green, if you had Marsh and Hazelwood or Nisa, plus Stark, plus Cummins, like you've got a giant pace attack that can lighten the load in what will be back-to-back tests. And that's important because, Cummins must be exhausted. The mental challenges of combating England in a baseball mode with all the quirky field changes and everything that's happening on and off the field, he would be he's done so well, Cummins. And I know his figures don't show it yesterday, but he hoisted that team from nowhere in the first innings with, 6 wickets or 5 wickets, including skittled almost the entire top order. But he has to be getting tired. He has to be. I think the first signs of it were there yesterday.
Peter, thank you. Mark's in Bundoora. Welcome to you, Mark.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the show. It's really good. Just want to talk about Dave Warner, and I recall 10, 12 years ago when he came into the Test team, it was often debated whether he would become a Test player because he was such a slogger and a hitter and such a freewheeler. And now he's kind of got the opposite problem where he's not the same Warner that he was 10 or 12 years ago. Should he be trying to hit the ball a bit more? Should he be reverting back to what he was good at 10 years ago?
Well, it's a good question, Mark. He came in, remember Greg Chappell saw him in the nets as a T20 player who virtually hadn't played a first-class game, and he said, "You're better than you think you are. You will rise as a Test batsman, and you can do this, and he had to, his effort to fluctuate between the formats was terrific, wasn't it? Because in T20 cricket, the art is getting bat on everything, and in Test cricket, the greatest shot you've got for the first hour is the leave, isn't it? The one you don't play. I think that Warner in this series there's just this viperous ball that rises outside the off stump from Broad, which he's got to be on red alert for. He's been reasonably brisk. He's been getting along there, but you can't. It's just that one, that honey sweet, the one that nips off the deck and swings away outside the off stump, that it's his poison, and he just has to be on red alert for that. Outside that ball, he's been as aggressive as he normally is.
Mark, thank you. We're mid-conversation with Robert Craddock this Monday, assessing what happened at Headingley, what it means for the Ashes and the strategic choices that lie ahead for Australia with a 2-1 lead. David is in Richmond. David, welcome aboard.
Oh, good morning, Gerard. Morning, Crash. I actually texted Gideon last week, who's played cricket with us. I said, I think this is going to go 2-2 following the Bairstow fiasco at Lords. But I also said to my English mate, I said at work, why is Wood and Wokes not in the team? Two of the possibly best bowlers, beautiful action, they bring them in, and look what's happened. It's completely changed the look of the team.
David, you're a good judge. As Mark Wood's arrival was, he was a belated arrival, wasn't he? But there'd been enough in that Hobart test to say this was on if he could get himself fit and firing.
Oh, yeah. And look, that's a terrific little call from David there, because here's a couple of things. I was really surprised Wokes didn't play at Lords because he's the king of Lords. He averages 11 runs per wicket at Lords. He just dominates like others. So why didn't he play in the second test as well as the third? And you're right, there is this certain mystery about Mark Wood. Why was he only ready for the third test? We know he's always had arm injuries, but he returned from the IPL because of the birth of his child early. There was no sense of injury. So they've really cost themselves by their late induction of Mark Wood. And your other point's a good one too, in that, I get that the dismissal stumped of John Bairstow, Australia was in the rules and all that, but you do pay a price. And the price is extra crowd antagonism, stirring up the opposition. It'll be interesting to see after Test 5 when you look back at that and think, was it really worth it, that stumping off Johnny Bairstow? And, you know, it'll be, the jury is out on it because the collateral damage is you've still got to play another 3 tests in the country and face up to these absolute rabid fans. So it's an interesting point you make. There had to be a fallout. There was a fallout, and it's now 2-1 with 2 to play.
Joe's with us in Forest Hill. Joe, hello.
Good morning, gents. I agree with your points about Mitch Marsh because I just think you can't flirt with form. But my other point is I think we should fight fire with fire because we now know what the Poms came to throw at us, which was all their fast bowlers, and I think we should go in that way. And I think Boland should be replaced by Hazelwood, but what about Nessa coming in for Todd Murphy? And I think also that Cam Green should probably stay out because I think the pressure and his success as well in a previous series has probably got in his head a bit, and he's just overthinking what shot to play against these guys on those sort of pitches. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of batsmen say that England is a real field tour, and it can take you a couple of Ashes tours to really get the feel of the place. Like in the old days, players went to county cricket. The Wars went to, Stephen and Mark both played county cricket over there, and it was a regular rite of passage for Australian to learn the English way. Labuschagne did that. But less so these days. Now, Cameron Green is still feeling his way in English conditions. And I remember Matthew Hayden, it wasn't until his very last test in England in 2005, after all his tours, he scored a century. And he said, you know what, mate, I've been fighting the conditions here. And before I left my first tour, Bill Brown, the old opener, just said to me, Matt, play straight for the first half hour and then put eat your potatoes and veggies before you have your fancy pavlovas, and then you can play square of the wicket. He said, why didn't I listen to him? So it is an art form learning to bat in England, and I think Cameron Green is still learning that. Michael Nisa, you mentioned, he's been released to play for Glamorgan. He's an interesting one. He scored an 80 and 100 recently, as well as taking wickets. He could be a surprise selection at some point, maybe sooner than we think.
Lots of messages on the 40 Wings Temper text 0433 98 11 16. Temper, a mattress like no other. So without a word of a lie, Crash, there's a case to open with Head, Labuschagne, Green, Marsh and Carey, all to replace Warner. So everyone's running a different theory. David had texted through the resourcefulness and stamina of those who keep finding excuses to retain Warner is admirable. However, he's never had a technique for England in general and Broad in particular, and he's demonstrated it again. England is still England, Broad is still Broad, and Warner is still Warner, but now 36 and out of form. Why take 2 reserve openers if they're not going to be considered? Harris or Green opens. And then on the Mitch Marsh front, Josh texts through, Gerard, forgive me, I have sinned. I am one of those Mitch Marsh critics and was so surprised he got a game. I dipped my lid to Mitch because anyone that can smash Mark Wood all over the place definitely has some kind of talent. And marbles from Mount Martha, a wasted talent no more. That was the best Australian innings of clubbing an opponent in submission I have seen in 50 years. My son and I stayed up super late as we couldn't turn away and miss history unfold before our eyes. That is from Marbles. So last one on the men's Ashes, Crash. Do you worry about what this momentum can do for England, or does the fact that Australia lived this the last time around in far more devastating circumstances and bounced back to win the 4th test, and the fact that there's a breather serves them well?
Oh, yeah. I do worry about the momentum shift because it's just their crowds are loud to a next level. You know, they're so passionate and it's intimidating. Like, it's like a footballer playing a state of origin game every day. It does grind you down. And that's, in a weird sort of way, Gerard, that's one of the reasons why there's many facets. Warner is in the battle of his life, and I totally get all the people saying that he should be dumped. Even I have mixed feelings about it. But I'm picturing the madness of this Old Trafford and all that. And for whatever he isn't, he's a bull warrior. You know what I mean? That's his mantra. And I think that won't scare Warner. Like, he'll get out there and do his best. It's a hard thing to bring someone else in to cover that. So, but they're finding themselves, England. Soft spots are appearing as they're finding sweet spots, like Mark Wood's bowling. Excellent, outstanding. He'll play in the next test. Ben Stokes is injured. Robinson is injured and will be gone. Bairstow's out of form. So their side is in a big state of flux too, England, just as ours is. But they've seen the bottom of the abyss. They're right at the barrel. Australia were 3 wickets away from humiliating them by claiming the Ashes in 3 tests. It didn't happen. They're back in the contest. And there's few things in sport more dangerous than a man who's seen the bottom of the well and suddenly he's on the way back.
I love it. They had the urn in their keeping. England won by 3 runs and then in a thriller with the Duckworth-Lewis method by 5 wickets. What are you making of the women's Ashes?
Yeah, it's interesting, Gerard. Initially, I felt it was going to be overshadowed by the men's Ashes, which you could put Elvis on stage at the moment, and I think you'd feel overstaged by the men's Ashes, wouldn't you? But it has really, it's actually fed off the whole Ashes sort of narrative, and it's been doing really well. 21,600 at Lord's yesterday. Now, that's terrific for the women's game. And if Australia's only got to win one of the last 3 50-over games to win the Ashes. But what I like is the gap, in a way, is closing between... Australia is still the dominant nation in women's cricket. We've said it so often. We stole a break against the rest of the world, didn't we, about 10 years ago, and they've never caught up. But England are improving, and nations like them are going to be very hard to beat in the future.
So these 3 ODIs happen before the next men's test, so it's now perfectly placed. So Wednesday, Saturday and Tuesday. So clean air for the women's Ashes to come to its culmination.